All right. Hello, Mr. Ippolito's U.S. history students, eighth graders at Rio Norte Junior High School. This is Mr. Ippolito. I want to give a shout out to a few students who are already on the chat. So Isaac, Joseph, Nicholas. We've got Sean, Surya, Nicholas again, Yabsara. I'm just checking out. I don't know who Salamander is, but hello to you, Salamander. Sean, John. There's Yabsara again. Cool. Well, hello. And if I missed anybody, I apologize. It looks like I got everybody who's hanging out in the chat. So once again, this is Mr. Ippolito. This is our online Unit 1 history review for your Unit 1 exam. And we're going to take your questions, take your questions through chat. I'm going to go through. If I don't hear any questions, then I will just kind of go through the study guide one by one. But if you want to instead, because we only have an hour, and I want to be able to make the best use of your time. And so if you can ask in the chat the things that are most on your mind, the things that you are wondering about the most, then we can make the best use of your time and hopefully get you all ready for that exam. While you are, and if you have a specific question, if you want to refer to number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever, go ahead and put that in the chat right now. Hello, and yes, John, 1 hour plus. We're looking to go for 1 hour, 7 to 8 p.m. Unless the questions keep coming, we might go a little bit after. I will let you know that I still don't have a final number of questions. Mr. Edwards and I are both collaborating on the exam, and Mr. Edwards, I think he has a class this evening. He might be jumping in and joining us a little bit later on. I have invited him to the Google Hangout, but I'll be running it until he gets here. So I don't have an exact number of questions. If you're going to ask questions about like how many questions, what type, multiple choice, the same thing I told you in class already. It's going to be mostly multiple choice questions. There may be a couple of written short answer questions, so just be prepared for that. And then if I do give written short answer questions, there's a strong likelihood that those written short answer questions are going to come straight off of your study guide. There's a fairly good likelihood of that. So just kind of putting that out there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just start off with your question. Sean asks, do we have to write the full name of the Enlightenment thinkers on the test? I'll start off by saying, no, you don't need to know full names of Enlightenment thinkers. I will tell you the Enlightenment thinkers that I am specifically focused on, starting off with Thomas Hobbes. I think it's important to know Thomas Hobbes, and I like the Thomas Hobbes connection. When we talked about Loki, I showed you the clip from the Avengers movie, the original Avengers movie, and in that movie clip, you remember we had Loki speaking to the crowd and telling them to kneel, that humans are made to be ruled. And that is kind of the Thomas Hobbes philosophy. In his book, Leviathan. He talked about how people should not make decisions for themselves. The common people should not make decisions for themselves. And instead, they need a strong leader like a king, a monarch, an emperor to rule for them, to make decisions for them. So that's kind of the old way of thinking in Europe. And then the new way of thinking, that new Enlightenment way of thinking, Thomas Hobbes is kind of a pre-Enlightenment thinker. You have people like John Locke. That would be your natural rights. He talks about those 3 natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and that the government has the responsibility to protect those natural rights. So that's John Locke. You then have Jean-Jacques Rousseau from France. John Locke is from England. Rousseau from France. Rousseau talks about social contract theory, right? It's this idea that the people and the government enter into a social contract together. The people agree to follow the laws and to support the government, and in exchange, the other side of the contract is that the government agrees to protect the rights of the people. And so Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, he draws upon that social contract theory and basically says that in that big paragraph, in that main paragraph of the Declaration, or what I think is the most important paragraph, where he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. He's really drawing upon that social contract theory from Rousseau, this idea that King George III has broken the social contract. It was his responsibility to protect the rights of all of his citizens, including the citizens from the British colonies in the Americas. And since he broke that contract, it is now not only the right of the American people to form a new government, but it's their duty, it's their responsibility. So Enlightenment thinkers, Hobbes, pre-Enlightenment, John Locke, natural rights, Rousseau, social contract, and then finally we would get to Montesquieu, Baron de Montesquieu, also a French Enlightenment philosopher, and then he talked about the separation of powers. And so separation of powers, we're going to learn a little bit more as we learn about the Constitution, but separation of powers, the way we see it in our own system of government today, you have two different kinds of separation of powers. You have the separation of powers between the state and the federal government. So the state of California has certain responsibilities. The federal government has certain rights and responsibilities, even local governments like the city of Santa Clarita or the county of Los Angeles. That's power that is separated. And then also within separation of powers would be the three branches of government. The idea that the United States government is based upon an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And again, we're going to learn all about that in this quarter. But just know that Montesquieu, another French philosopher, he was all about the separation of powers. So I think that pretty much covers the Enlightenment thinkers that you're going to need to know for your exam tomorrow. Okay, I'm going back through and just trying to sort through. And I would ask, if you can, just make sure you keep the chat to academic topics. If you want to answer someone's question, you can do that. But we're going to try to just turn off the social commentary and let's keep it just focused on academics. That way we help everybody to do the best they possibly can in the exam. Okay, so I'm kind of going back in time here. Sean asked about Enlightenment thinkers. And Yabsura said, what's up? Okay. John says, quick question. Should I my notes? You're going to have your notes for the rest of the evening, but you have me for the next 54 minutes. So if you want, you could do a combination of both. Have your notes. Particularly, it would be helpful in these next 54 minutes if you have your notes in front of you. And that way you look at those notes, look at that study guide. And if you have any questions or you're like, I have no idea what this means, then that would be a good question to ask me. Okay. So do we have to spell Dieu et mon droit on the quiz? So this is not a spelling test in case you're worried about spelling. That's not, I don't ever try to do a gotcha situation when it comes to spelling Maddox. Ask that question. And no, but you should understand the concept of Dieu et mon droit. In French, that translates to God and my right. So that was the phrase that was inscribed on the throne of the king or queen, mostly kings of England. And it's basically, that embodies the divine right of kings, that old way of thinking. The idea that who gives the king his power to rule? And they believed during much of the medieval period and into the Renaissance period, they believed that God gave the king the right to rule. And so then the next question is, well, where do people get their rights? And in the old system, they believed that God gave the king the right to rule, and then the king gives the people their rights. And of course, in that new system, after those Enlightenment thinkers, and we get John Locke and the idea of natural rights, then it flips that, right? Instead of the divine right of kings, it is Locke and the Enlightenment thinkers, Jefferson, saying God gives, or we are born with certain unalienable rights. We're born with certain natural rights. So we don't get those rights from a king or a queen. We get those directly at birth, and they are unalienable, meaning they cannot be separated from us. We have them forever and always, and no one can take those rights away. Okay, Sean asked Jean-Jacques Rousseau. You did spell Jean-Jacques Rousseau correctly, Sean. Again, not a spelling test. Do we need to know all the battles of the Revolutionary War? Joseph, that's a great question. No, I am not a battle historian, nor are all of the battles of the Revolutionary War. Those are not an 8th grade history standard. However, the content standards do ask for us to know some key battles, right? So key battles would be Lexington and Concord. That would be the start of the American Revolution. The first shots are fired in Massachusetts. So I think Lexington and Concord would be important to know. The next battle of Bunker Hill, the first kind of formal engagement. Lexington and Concord, first shots fired. The Battle of Bunker Hill, the first like formal battle of the American Revolution. The other two battles that I think are important, Battle of Saratoga. You'll recall Battle of Saratoga was that turning point battle the one that it was an important American victory. It served as a turning point because that was when the colonists, the patriots, George Washington and the Continental Army, they really started to have more victories after that. It was looking grim for them up until that point. Battle of Saratoga, and then and that was also Battle of Saratoga was also the battle that taught, or that sent the message to France that they could take us seriously, that we really had a chance of winning, and therefore we could really use their support. And they wanted to back a winning horse. They wanted to support a cause that they thought could actually win. And once they saw us beat England, or Great Britain rather, at the Battle of Saratoga, then they knew that we actually had a chance. And so then they agreed to give us their support. By the way, Benjamin Franklin was our ambassador to France at the time, and really instrumental in helping to secure France's help. That's just kind of a fun fact. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be on the exam, but fun fact, Benjamin Franklin really was instrumental in getting that help from the French. So that was Battle of Saratoga. Final battle that you'll want to know about is Yorktown. General Cornwallis of Great Britain, he was the one who surrendered. This was at Yorktown of Virginia. So George Washington leading the Continental Army. We have support of the French Navy. So the French Navy is out in Chesapeake Bay. And finally, the British have no choice but to surrender. So Yorktown, final battle of the American Revolution. And so I think those are like the 4 military engagements that I think you should know about the Revolution. So Joseph, great question. Ashley asks, is the test about all the things we have talked about? Yes, all the things we've talked about. Obviously, if I talk about them, this is actually a good, just sort of a good strategy, I think, for classes in general. If you're bombarded with information, right? There's information in reading, and there's information if we watch a video. There's information in gallery walks, and kind of information coming from everywhere. But chances are, if a teacher talks about it in class and makes a point to say something about it, then chances are it's more likely that it's going to be on the exam, because the teacher feels like it's important knowledge to know and important knowledge to test you on. So Ashley, great question. Yes. Okay. So the next question, the guy who said we need to be ruled. Surya, I think you're talking about Thomas Hobbes there. Yep, Thomas Hobbes, good. Are we going to have to know all these people, says Isabelli. Are we going to need to know all these people? Yes, all the ones we're talking about, you should know those people, yes. Okay, how many questions are on the test? The test asks, Connor. I did address that earlier in the Hangout, and I said that I haven't finalized it yet. Mr. Edwards and I are still working on finalizing the exam, but the joke is it's somewhere between 1 and 100. In actuality, the number of multiple choice questions are around 40, and probably a couple of written responses is what you should expect. Okay, so what's an Enlightenment thinker? Oh, I already answered that question. Sorry, I'm kind of losing. I want to go back here. I want to make sure I try to answer everyone's question in the order in which it was asked, and you have a lot of questions, which is good. Okay, so there we go. So what's an Enlightenment? Oh, I already answered that question. Do we need to memorize the core paragraph? Okay, so Surya asks that. You don't need to memorize the core paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. However, you should understand it, right? We talked a little bit about it in class, and so I'm not going to spend too much more time on it, but it starts with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I call that the core paragraph of the Declaration, because that's really what's at the heart of the whole thing. It's Thomas Jefferson saying, this is why we are breaking away. He is making an intellectual argument. Thomas Jefferson is a student. He's an intellectual. He's an Enlightenment thinker. He's also a student of Enlightenment thought. And so he wants to send a message to the American people and to the world. Hey, I've done my homework here. I know I'm going to give really sound reasons for why we're breaking away. So it's not just a hissy fit. It's actually, these are sound philosophical reasons. We have a really good reason for, excuse me, really good reason for breaking away. I'm going to get a little water here. All right. So So yeah, you don't need to memorize it. You just need to know the main ideas. And I think the other main idea from that paragraph would be the fact that Jefferson says that it's our not only our right to overthrow the old government, it's our responsibility, which I think is really powerful. It's that quote from the movie National Treasure that you saw, where Gates, he says this is the message that is at the heart of it all. So basically, those who have the power to do something have the responsibility to do something. It's very Spider-Man. Anyway, okay. So the next question: can you go over number 6 and number 8? Yes, I can do that. So I'm going to switch over here and see if, instead of just looking at my face the whole time, we can maybe look at the study guide. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see the study guide right now and still hear my voice. So number 6, what French phrase was at the top of the throne of the British king? So I did just address that. That's Dieu et mon droit. I'm not going to address it again, but that is, Naomi, I think you were the one who asked the question. You can look back after we're all done. You can go back and you can hear that part, because that was maybe like 10 minutes ago. What does it mean and what does it have to do with the American Revolution? Already addressed that. So number 6, I've already addressed. Number 8, know the core paragraph. Oh, know all the vocabulary, the key points, and we just talked about the core paragraph as well. So Naomi, what I'm going to encourage you to do, since I've kind of addressed both of those just now, probably since you've asked the question, but if you still are unsure about it, just ask me maybe a more specific question about 6 or 8, and I would be happy to help you with that. Okay. Can you, let me go back here and let's see. There we go. Oh, I'm going to stop screen sharing. That was crazy. Let's see. All right, here we go. Can you define Enlightenment thinker, please? That's a good question, John. And Enlightenment, they were from Europe, and the Enlightenment thinkers were from mainly France and England during the 1600s. And it's this shift in thought. It was this set of thinkers that decided that we should think about government differently, and we should think about the relationship between government and the people. And rather than that old way of thinking, the divine right of kings, it's a new way of thinking. It's this idea that the rights, people are born with rights that cannot be taken away, and rights that the government must protect. And if the government is not protecting our rights, then we have the right as the people to overthrow that government and form a new government. That's essentially when we talk about Enlightenment thinkers who we're talking about. So good question, John. Can you go over number 7 on the study guide? And number 7 asks, what do the phrases consent of the governed and all men are created equal mean? What did they mean in 1776? What do they mean to us today? Okay, 2 phrases, consent of the governed and all men are created equal. Consent of the governed. So consent means permission, right? So sometimes in school, instead of calling something a permission slip, we call it a consent form, but it means the same thing. Consent means you give permission for something to happen. So consent of the governed means that the government has our consent, our permission to rule us, to create a structure under which we have to live, but we give the government permission to do that. So we're going to, this is perfect timing because just in a couple of weeks, we're going to give permission to lawmakers. We're going to participate in an election, and we're going to vote for the people who are going to make decisions for us, right? So we as the people, we give the government permission to make rules and laws for us. That's consent of the governed. That's that phrase is used in the Declaration of Independence, and we still use that phrase today because we still argue about how much power government should have and what type of power we should give government over our lives, and where we want government to step in and help us, and where we want government to stay out of our lives. So consent of the governed is still a phrase that we use even today. The other phrase is all men are created equal. So this phrase, all men are created equal, again, this was another phrase from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, et cetera, et cetera. Thomas Jefferson, this is one of the core things in his core paragraph. All men are created equal. Now, at the time, in 1776, when Jefferson used that phrase, most historians think that he was talking about all white men over the age of 21 who owned property, right? Because those were the people, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we learn about voting rights in our country and over time how voting rights have changed. But those were the people that mattered more in the late 1700s. Those were the people when our country was founded. Those are the people who were given the opportunity, the privilege of voting. White, male, over the age of 21, and owned property, right? Landowners. So, but it was a step toward advancing towards a greater expansion of what that meant and a greater inclusion of all Americans. So today, when we hear the phrase "all men are created equal," we hear a much more expanded definition. So the first thing to fall, the first qualification was the property qualification. So in the early 1800s is kind of when that fell away. So you no longer needed to own property in order to vote. And then after the Civil War, then African American men could vote. So then it wasn't based on skin color. Both black and white Americans could vote after the Civil War, and there's been struggle over that as well up until the 20th century, and even still today. There are questions about voting rights and who should have access to voting, how long we should open up polls, and too much to go into right now because that's not going to be on your exam. We'll talk about that later. Women, of course, got the right to vote in the United States in 1920, in some states a little bit earlier, but the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. So women got the right to vote. And then finally, during the Vietnam War, the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 down to 18. Some states had already been doing 18, but the 26th Amendment said that all states need to make voting age a minimum of 18 years old. So that's how the definition of all men are created equal has expanded and changed over time. Great question. Frembo, whoever you are. Okay. Aiden, can you have a shout out? Yes, you can. And then why can't we use notes? I just short answer, Yubster, as to why you can't use notes. You've had an opportunity to kind of get some practice when taking your quizzes, the smaller quizzes, you can, but this is an end of unit exam, and so I don't allow notes to be used. And so that's just a rule that I have. If you could make an argument why I should change that rule, then we can talk about that after the exam's over for a future exam. But for tomorrow, the rule will be you got to have everything up here, and there will be no notes on the exam. Okay, so can we use our notes? The answer is no. Good. How's your day been? Aiden asks. It's doing great, and it's even better now that I'm spending some time with you. All right. Oh, and Mr. Edwards says, Mr. Ippolito, I'm ready if you want to invite me in. Mr. Edwards, I believe that I invited you in, but I will invite you one more time, and I will send you that invite. So, Mr. Edwards, just jump on in. I just sent that to your Gmail account, and hello, Mr. Edwards. All right. Are you good, bro? Sasha asks, yes. Because the point of it, oh, okay. Can you go over number 7 in the study guide? I did that. Okay. Everything in quarter 1, even the National Treasure movie, Catherine asks. So Catherine, yes, even the National Treasure movie, but not like plot details. I'm not going to ask you about pizza or how to steal the Declaration of Independence, nothing like that. Really, the part from National Treasure that I might ask you about would be the part where Gates is talking about the Declaration of Independence and its importance, its significance. We talked about that a little bit earlier. He talks about the core paragraph of the Declaration. So if you know the core paragraph, then you know the most important part of the movie National Treasure. Okay. Is the test going to go over just the questions on the review, or are there going to be other questions? Well, Naomi, I think it would... I think I would be putting myself into a corner if I said that I'm only limiting it to the review. Of course, there may be some questions that on stuff you've learned from quarter 1 that perhaps were not included in the review, but for the most part, the stuff that's in the review matters and it's important. And I would feel like it would be an awful waste of time if you did that whole review and then there was very little of the review on the exam. So the review is a good help. It's not everything. I think another really good thing to help you is if you go into that Quizlet one more time. The Quizlet, by the way, all of those Quizlet flashcards that I shared with you, and when we played Quizlet Live, those are all available to you. I shared those with you in Google Classroom. So check your Google Classroom or check your Gmail and click on the link to Google Classroom, because I've shared all those things with you. So you can play Quizlet at home as well after we're done here, because we're going to be done in another 36 minutes. And that's another way that you can review and study. Okay. What was the first? Yabsara asks, what was the first war? I'm not sure what that question means. We may throw in a question on French and Indian War, but really the big war that we're focusing on here is the Revolutionary War, the American Revolution. So do we need to know about what the Supreme Court does? Frembo asks, and the answer is not yet, because we talked about the Supreme Court briefly, but we're going to go over, just because it was very relevant, because we were in the midst of a Supreme Court confirmation. So great question. I'm not putting Supreme Court on here. Supreme Court definitely, though, you will need to know when we study the Constitution in the coming weeks, in the coming quarter. Okay. What are the key points in the core paragraph? Asks Kayla. And so, Kayla, I think, all right, well, I've had so many questions and we've talked about the core paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share, and then of independence. And we'll go to the document. And for those people who are still kind of wondering, what is that core paragraph? It's loading a little slowly, but we're going to get there. And then I'll show you exactly, when we talk about the core paragraph, I'll show you, oh, this is the one that we showed in class. All right, I'm taking a brief sip of water real quick, pardon me. All right, so there it is right here. It starts right here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That's that concept of natural rights, right, that John Locke talked about. And Thomas Jefferson just switches it up and calls them unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. John Locke said that our natural rights are life, liberty, and property. Jefferson switched it up a little bit. And then he says, here's where Jefferson says, this is the purpose of government, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. This is why we create governments, is to protect our natural rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, government doesn't get its power from God. Government doesn't get its power from anyone else except for the people. We provide the permission for the government to rule us. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, in other words, when government messes up and they break the social contract, when they're not doing what it is their job to do, which is to protect our rights, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. So when government doesn't do their job and they don't uphold their end of the social contract, we can then change the government, or we can get rid of the government and institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So if our government isn't doing what we need for it to do, we can get rid of it, form a new one that's going to provide us with safety and happiness. And then I'm going to skip over this part, and then this is that national treasure part right there. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, these are all the bad things that King George III did, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. So a despotism is basically when you have a ruler that does not take into account the needs of his people at all. He is a tyrant. He is a despot. It is their right. It is their duty, right? So those who have the power to act have the responsibility to act, to throw off such government and to provide future new guards for their future security. So he's actually kind of setting up the Constitution in a way, right? And of course, first the Articles of Confederation, but then later the Constitution, because he's saying it's our right to throw off this government and provide new guards for their future security, meaning create a new government, originally the Articles of Confederation, then and eventually the more powerful and long-lasting system, which of course was the Constitution. And then That's when he goes into all of the list of complaints, right? The list of grievances against King George III. And then, but that's now a new paragraph. So, Kayla, you asked a great question, and I think we have answered that question. Okay, we're going to stop sharing the screen now, and we're going to go back. And hi, it's me again. Okay, so Connor asks, are we turning the study guide in? It's just for you. So you answer as much or as little of the study guide as you, Connor. It's up to you. It's really just to help you prepare for this exam. Caitlin asks, can we go over number 1 and number 7? So I think we already went over number 7, consent of the government are created equal. So we did that. And then number 1, name 3 influences, whether ancient or from the Enlightenment era, on the development of American government. Okay, so we've already talked about the Enlightenment. That was at the top of our broadcast. So I'm not going to talk about that again. I will talk about ancient influences and kind of the stuff in between ancient and Enlightenment. So ancient Greece, we learned about that. This, by the way, if you go into your notes, this is like, second week of school, where we talked about the roots of American government. So ancient Greece, they give us democracy, the idea that people participate in the government by voting directly on laws. So we call ourselves a democracy, although we're not a true democracy. We're kind of, but not truly. Because in the United States government, we don't make laws for the United States. Instead, we model our United States government after the Roman Republic, because Rome was the one that created the Republic, where you vote for representatives, and then those representatives they go and make the laws for you. So we have a legislative branch, we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. Together, they form Congress, and they are the representatives that form our legislative branch, right? The legislative body that makes the laws. So, that idea we get from Rome, this idea of representative government, also known as a republic. So, Greek democracy, Rome republic. We do actually have a form of that Greek democracy at the state level. So, if you've been following the elections, we have the propositions, and I'm sure you've seen all the advertisements on, vote for Prop 10 or Prop 11 or Prop 12. All those propositions are the people of the state of California. It's our opportunity to vote directly on laws for the state of California. So even though we don't have direct democracy at the United States at the national level, we still have it in the form of propositions. It's also called initiatives at the state level. So that's our form of our nod to Greek democracy. So Greek democracy, Roman Republic. And then we also learned about Magna Carta, and I'm not going to go into all of the details of Magna Carta. One of the things that I love most about Magna Carta, though, I'll mention one thing, is this idea of habeas corpus. The idea that if the government were to detain you, that habeas corpus is Latin for present the body. So the government would take someone, police would take someone and lock them up, and you wouldn't see them. This is like back in the old days, right? The old system of government where the government could just, lock you up indefinitely, and unfortunately still happens in some countries around the world today. So this idea of habeas corpus, Latin for present the body, came from when loved ones, friends, or family members would go to the jail and say, please present the body of our loved one, either show that he is alive and well, so that we can see that he still exists, or give us his body, his remains, so that he can have a proper burial, right? So that's where this Latin phrase, habeas corpus, present the body, comes from. Today, there are still the people in the law still use habeas corpus, because police today in the United States have 48 hours between arrest and the time where formal charges need to be filed against a suspect accused of a crime. So habeas corpus is still alive and well in our system of law today, and that goes all the way back to the year 1215 in England, when that was first put into Magna Carta. And then for more details, you should go over the Magna Carta. And I don't know exactly where it is in the textbook, but we did reading on it. We did some study on Magna Carta. And if you just look in your index, you can find Magna Carta. Okay, and then, so Caitlin, so Greek democracy, Roman Republic, and Magna Carta, those are the three big things that from the roots of American government that I can think of off the top of my head that I think are the most important. And then number 7, I think we already talked about. Yes. Okay, so Caitlin, I believe I have successfully answered your question. And then Frembo, you just said, can you go over the main idea of Magna Carta? I talked about habeas corpus. So Magna Carta in general, right? A little background on Magna Carta. Um, King John was a horrible king. He was abusing his power, particularly his power of taxation. And the nobles, you have to understand that Magna Carta was not like a document of the people. It wasn't of the common people. It was nobles. It was the wealthy landowners who basically sat the king down and said, you know that you're a bad king when you're upsetting the wealthiest people in your country, which he was. So it put limits on taxation, said that the king could not just tax whomever he pleased. It guaranteed certain due process rights for citizens, and mainly, again, these nobles were kind of looking out for themselves. But Magna Carta is the first time in England, and of course we inherit a lot of legal traditions from England. It's the first time that anyone ever said to the king, you can't just do whatever you want. So 2 words I want you to remember from Magna Carta: limited government, right? It's this idea that our government, and it's this idea now has been around for 800 years, the government can't just do whatever they want. Our leader, the chief executive or Congress, they can't just do whatever they want. They have to, they are limited by the law. So no one is above the law. I think that's kind of another message of Magna Carta as well. So hopefully I think I gave you, Frembo, gave you some of the main ideas of Magna Carta. Aiden asks, how's your day been? Again, it's great. Nicholas is turning it, no, you're not turning it in. It's just all for your benefit. And Nicholas, it's on the website. If you need to download another copy, I also sent it to you. Pretty sure I sent it to you in Google Classroom again, just as a reminder, so you can check that out. Will the core paragraph be a part of the multiple choice part or the writing part? That's Maddox's question. Maddox, the answer is yes, one of those two. Okay. Can you tell us what the writing section will be about? John asks. And John, so I mentioned earlier that I don't know yet because I haven't decided. What I will tell you though, John, is that I am more likely, since I have crafted these, Mr. Edwards and I together have crafted these beautiful questions in the study guide, it would be an awful shame to let those go to waste. So if we were going to give a written response, I'm guessing that we would probably choose from those questions that we've included in the study guide because they're great questions. Okay. Can you tell us what oh yeah, where can we find information about the core of the Declaration of Independence? Read about it, and we just went over it, like I went over it line by line. So rewind when you're all done, when we're all done in 23 minutes, rewind back to, I don't know, 7:20 or so, 20 minutes in, and we talk about the core paragraph. Okay, if Christopher found America, how did British own America? Okay, so Yabsar is asking about, I think about Columbus, and we did just have Columbus Day, October 12th. So Christopher Columbus, that's a little bit more in our seventh grade history standards, although it may have been mentioned kind of briefly in the overview at the beginning of 8th grade in the textbook. We're really not going to be, there's really nothing on Columbus that I'm going to be asking. But I can tell you that Christopher Columbus never actually landed anywhere on land that is part of the United States. So he landed in the Caribbean, I believe on the island of Hispaniola, which is today half the Dominican Republic and half Haiti. So Christopher Columbus only indirectly has an influence on American history in that he popularized this idea of, like, he spread the word that he had visited what he thought were islands off the coast of India. That's why the people he called Indians. But he kind of spread the word. And so that's why he is recognized as significant in American history, because he then led to future exploration. In the 1500s, it was the Spanish, and then it was the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch. The English were actually kind of late onto the scene. The English didn't come, if Columbus's voyage was in 1492, the English didn't come onto the scene until 1607. And then they started settling what is today the east coast of the United States, Virginia, and then shortly after Massachusetts. So that's why, Yabsar, if you're asking, how did the British own America for a while? That was how, because the British settled what is today those 13 colonies, right? And those 13 colonies will eventually revolt against the British and become 13 states of the United States of America. And then that's now the country that we have today. Okay, Catherine asks, is there going to be extra credit? Most certainly not. Okay. Are there going to be bonus questions? No. Oh my goodness. And then I think I'm just trying to kind of go back in time. I lost it a little bit here. But thank you, Mr. Edwards. It looks like you're kind of jumping on and helping out in the chat, which I appreciate. So thank you. And a lot of people jumping in. So that's good. Oh my goodness. Okay, so again, probably a good time just to remind you to keep the chat related to history, just because it's making it a little bit more difficult for me to scroll through everything when some of these comments are not related to history. So, okay, I think I'm back here. Okay, are there going to be bonus questions? I think I already answered, and the answer is no. Just trying to go through some of these comments. Caitlin asks, can you go over number 9? So hi, Caitlin. Yes, I can. Number 9 says, why did the authors of the Articles of Confederation decide to make the central government so weak? And what were 2 of the problems caused by this weak central government? So here's what I will do for you. I will say that I think the reason why the authors of the Articles decided to make it so weak, we talked about this in class, it's because they were scared. If you look at the relationship between the people and its government, like a relationship, right? Like a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. The relationship that they just got out of with King George III and the British Parliament, the British government, they considered it to be a tyranny. So you could consider it like an abusive relationship, where when I say that, I mean King George was abusing his power, and therefore they were very unhappy in that relationship because there was a lot of power that King George had over his colonists in North America. So if you think about it again in that relationship analogy, if you're just getting out of a really bad relationship where the one party is very controlling and that person had a lot of power, that party had a lot of power, then when you enter into a new relationship, you kind of want it to be real kind of like low key, and you don't want to give the other party a lot of power. And so that's what the Articles of Confederation were. The Articles of Confederation were, instead of it being, we didn't really have a strong nation. Instead, what we had was a loose collection of 13 states that really didn't want to impose too much control over themselves. It was really just sort of this loose confederation. It was real casual, and it was real like, well, we don't want to make too many rules. For example, we're going to make it really difficult to pass a law. 9 out of the 13 states had to agree. We're going to make it really difficult to amend the Articles of Confederation. 13 out of 13. You needed a unanimous vote to change the Articles, which means it's never going to be changed. It's never going to be amended. There was no chief executive because, again, they were afraid of creating another king. There was no national judiciary, meaning there was no national court system. So there's no way to settle disputes between the states. Again, they just got out of a real controlling, really like a lot of rules kind of relationship. And so they wanted to enter this relationship where there were few rules and there was little control. But what they were soon finding out was that there were problems. And again, I'm not going to go over all of the problems with the Articles of Confederation. You can look in your notes to check out all those problems. I will say, though, that the final straw was Shays' Rebellion, because the Massachusetts legislature had these farmers. This is the story of Shays' Rebellion, which you read about. We really didn't talk about it too much in class, but there was this group of disgruntled farmers because there was inflation, because there was no national control of the economy at all. And when there's inflation, there wasn't inflation, there was deflation. And crop prices were falling. And when crop prices fell, then what happened was these farmers could no longer pay off their debts. And so these farmers in Western Massachusetts were really upset. They go to the courts that, they're trying to get some sort of remediation. And so they go to these like debt courts, and they're shutting down the courts that are going to foreclose on their farms. And so they're stopping the business of the court system in Western Massachusetts. And the Massachusetts legislature reaches out to the national government in Philadelphia and says, you got to help us. And the national government says, there's nothing we can do. We're powerless. We can't do anything because the Articles of Confederation have not given us as Congress the power to intervene. So Massachusetts, you're on your own. And so here's this rebellion. There's this uprising of the commoners, right? Like these are farmers with, pitchforks and guns and they're stopping the business of government in Massachusetts. And there's nothing that the national government can do. They're powerless. And that really is the turning point where, and we're going to study this coming up in our next unit, where people like James Madison and George Washington say, we've got to do something about this. We can't be an effective country when these rebels, when these farmers can stop the business of government from happening. So we need a stronger, more powerful national government. We'll get more into the story of the aftermath of Shays' Rebellion and how that influenced. But really, Shays' Rebellion is what pushes the founders to go back and meet back again in Philadelphia to form the Constitutional Convention, to do something about this mess that they'd gotten themselves in. They realized that they went from too strong of a national government under King George III to too weak of a government under the Articles of Confederation. So they needed to kind of swing back in the other direction. And so that's what the Articles of Confederation, that was the problem, the big problem that the Articles had was just too. Okay. Caitlin, I hope I answered your question. At least I think I answered it as much as I want to answer it because we have 14 minutes left. Okay. All right. I am trying to scroll through some of we've got a little bit of chatter here that's not related to history. Okay. List of complaints and grievances are the same thing. Kayla, that is exactly right. Complaints and grievances are the same thing. That is the next part after the core paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. That's the next part of the Declaration. So yes. Okay. Can we stop going over the same questions? Sure. Yes. But sometimes I think of some new things and I want to add to it. And so that's why. All right. John, I'm not going to make this YouTube live go for 3 hours. That would be way too long. Okay, from this point on, everyone just ask questions and watch. Oh, good. Okay. Will we have to remember the preamble list of complaints thingy? That's what Connor asked. The answer is you don't need to memorize the preamble. You should have an idea of like the different parts of the Declaration, right? So there's the preamble, and then there's like that core paragraph, the main message, and then there's the list of grievances and complaints against the king, and then there's the formal Declaration of Independence, right, where we finally say, hey, we're free. So yay, here we go. So I think to answer your question, Connor, and to answer your question, Kayla, should we know all the parts of the Declaration of Independence? Yeah, I think I just went over them. You should know the kind of the general structure. Yes. Sean asks, are we going to have a review in class? That was yesterday, and that's also tonight. This is your review, plus I gave you 9 great review questions that you can go over. Trial by jury. Oh, yes. Sean, thank you. Sean, you said trial by jury is part of Magna Carta, one of the guarantees, the due process guarantees, and I forgot to mention that. So yes, that is correct. Okay. What's the social contract, and can you go over Magna Carta? I've already gone over Magna Carta, and if you watched a little bit earlier, I did talk about social contract. It's not a paper, though. So please know, and I didn't mention this earlier, so I'll mention it now. Social contract is an idea. Social contract is a philosophy. And again, it's the philosophy that people and government form a contract. The government says, I will rule you. The people says, I will follow you. And the government agrees also to guarantee and protect our rights. When that breaks, then the government has broken the contract, and then we have the right to form a new government because the government broke their agreement to begin with. So the social contract is not, that's a great question, Frembo. It's not literally a piece of paper. It's not literally a like a signed contract. It's a concept. It's a government concept. Okay. Still going through here. When is democratic representative formed? Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your question. But if you're asking when did we first have representatives in the United States, we have had some form of representative government going all the way back to the time of the Mayflower in the 1600s. We had Americans voting for people who would make rules or laws for themselves, but it happened at the local level and at the state level, right? So that was already happening. It just the United States, or they were the colonies at the time, they didn't have sovereignty for themselves. Ultimately, the ultimate control and power rested in Great Britain, and so that was why ultimately we had to we felt that we had to break away and declare independence, was because of that. So yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question, but I hope I at least helped a little bit. Okay, are we supposed to know about the social contract? I've answered that. What about Shays Rebellion? Is that going to be on the test? Talked about Shays Rebellion already, so we're good there. It's what helped them. Oh, consent of the government. Okay, so Catherine, I think you were helping to answer a question. Let's see here. Catherine also mentioned do the Quizlet. It helps. And Catherine, you're absolutely right. That Quizlet is going to help. So again, once again, I mentioned it before. If you go into Google Classroom 2 days ago, or yesterday, I shared that Quizlet with you. So you can play that Quizlet on your phone. You can play that Quizlet on a computer. So if you want to do some more review, please take advantage of the Quizlet, and it's in Google Classroom. Okay. Sean Thomas, you said Pericles' funeral oration. You know what? I didn't get around to teaching that well. And I love Pericles' funeral oration. You're going to learn more about it in 10th grade history, and you're going to learn about it in 12th grade history, because I've taught both of those subjects, and I love Pericles' funeral oration. Probably not going to get to it, though, in this class. So don't worry about that. Yabser asks, when was habeas corpus created? At the time of Magna Carta. That's when it was kind of first introduced as a concept. Let's see here. Could I do intervention during homeroom? We've had a few different people ask that, and the answer is yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, let's go ahead. And if you are on this, if you're on this Hangout right now, and you would like to come in during tomorrow. Oh yeah, tomorrow is an A3 day, so both of my history classes will be after homeroom. Yes, certainly. I will go ahead, and I can tell you now that I will have I'll have a one extra review in my classroom. We'll fit as many people as we can who want to get a little bit more help reviewing and studying. And yes, I can make that happen for you. Okay. Should I make a Google Classroom with some of the people on here? Catherine, I'm not sure why, but I guess you could. Still looking for more questions. And Mr. Edwards, thank you. I'm sorry I can't. I'm sorry you're not able to jump on, but thank you at least, Mr. Edwards, for being in the chat. Okay. There's already, Annika, yes, there already is a Quizlet. All right, still trying to scroll through. Oh, so there was a question here. Can you help me understand the Northwest and the land ordinances? Let me just tell you, you don't need to know about the land ordinance of 1785. I know it was in your reading, but we're going to focus more on the land ordinance of 1785 in third quarter when we talk about the expansion of the United States. So don't worry about land ordinance of 1785. Northwest ordinance, yes, I think you should know about the Northwest ordinance. We talked about a lot of the failures under the Articles of Confederation, but there were a couple of successes. Land ordinance was one of them. Northwest ordinance was another success under the Articles of Confederation. Those 5 states that are in the Northwest Territory, today they're Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I think those are the 5. That's a little bit of Minnesota as well. That's the Northwest Territory. So what the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 did was it said, first of all, these are going to be the rules for when new states come into the Union, right? When we have enough people in a territory, then they can apply for statehood and become a state, and they're going to be equal to all the other states in the Union. So that's important. They weren't going to be colonies. They weren't going to be subordinate below any of the other states, or they were going to have equal footing with all of the other states. That's one important thing that came out of the Northwest Ordinance. The other is the fact that they decided that slavery was going to be banned in the Northwest Territory. So we're going to study, as we continue our study of American history, we're going to study more about slavery and the fight on behalf of some people to keep slavery going, and the fight for others to end slavery, to abolish slavery. And so that's the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So Surya, hopefully I answered that question for you. Okay, a lot of stuff here on the chat, and I think, have I actually gotten to the end of the chat? I might have. We have 6 minutes left. Yeah, I think we're now at the end of the chat here. Hello. So I'll kind of okay. Let me ask you, can you, okay, so we have another question. So are Hessian German mercenaries that supported loyalists or patriots? Oh, okay, the Hessians. Hessians are the German mercenaries. The British did not have enough troops to fight against the American patriots. And so they had to hire mercenaries. Mercenaries are soldiers for hire. But the problem with mercenaries, number one, they're from Germany. So they really don't care as much about Britain. They're not loyal to the country. That's always the problem when you have soldiers for hire, is they're not necessarily loyal to the country that they're fighting for. They're doing it for a paycheck. They're doing it for the money. So they ended up being, I would argue that the German mercenaries, these Hessians, were actually a disadvantage for the British. We beat them. The Patriots beat them at the Battle of Trenton. That was like that Christmas Eve or Christmas morning battle, where on Christmas Eve, and the Germans were like, "There's no way that the Americans are going to attack because it's Christmas." And George Washington was like, "Hey, I'm a smart guy. The best time to attack would be when they're not thinking that we're going to attack, and we're going to attack on Christmas morning." And sure enough, they did. That was the Battle of Trenton. And so that's the story behind the Hessians. Were the Hessians bounty hunters? No, a bounty hunter is something different. No, they were mercenaries. They were soldiers for hire. Okay. Okay, why did they have slaves if the rule says all men are created equal? Yep, sir, a great question. And you know what, let's hold off on that question until we actually start talking a little bit more about slavery, because that is a great question. And something that at the time, when Thomas Jefferson included those words, all men are created equal, there were very few people who would say, oh, well, do you mean slaves? Because Thomas Jefferson himself was a slaveholder, so he probably was not intending to include slaves. However, some historians would argue that part of the reason why Thomas Jefferson included that language was, although he realized the reality of his time was that slavery was not going to be ended anytime soon. The quote that I love from Thomas Jefferson is, he said, having slavery is like holding a wolf by the ears. You don't like it, but you don't dare let it go. He knew that slavery was a problem. He knew that it was going to be an issue. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson originally wanted to condemn slavery and say in his list of complaints against Great Britain that he allowed the slave trade to continue, was one of the complaints he wanted to make against Great Britain. And the delegates to the Constitutional Convention from the South, they refused to vote for the Declaration unless he had taken that out. So I think Jefferson acknowledged the problem with slavery, and perhaps he planted that all men are created equal phrase in the Declaration of Independence as a way of helping future generations to get rid of slavery, even though we couldn't do it ourselves. Because Abraham Lincoln is going to quote Thomas Jefferson. He's going to refer to the Declaration in many of his writings, and he's also going to refer to it in the Gettysburg Address during the Civil War. We'll get to that later. Okay. And let's see if I can. Oh, Naomi, you're going to do great. You just need to study. Will there be a change to make up the test? There's no makeup that I am planning for right now. There's no retake that I'm planning. However, I could be convinced to offer a retake, but let me just say this: try to do your best on this exam, right? And then if there's the need for a retake, Mr. Edwards and I will take that into consideration. But for right now, you should just plan to do your very best on this exam here. Good luck, everybody, on the test. Yes, I would say that. Are we supposed to know about the people that came to Virginia? Oh, Frembo, you're talking about the passenger manifest. And no, you don't need to. That was actually a lesson on primary sources. And so you don't need to know about that. I just thought that that was something interesting. I don't think you need to know about that. I don't know. I suppose maybe we could include that on the exam. But if we were going to include it on the exam, I would say there would be something about how people who were going to Virginia were primarily young men, young single men who were planning to make some money, maybe find some gold, which of course they never did in Virginia, and then go back. The people going to Virginia never had any intention of staying there. They never had any intention of being colonists and settling. They were just going to go for a little bit, make some money, go back to England. People going to Massachusetts were planning to stay. They were families, right? They brought an entire community on that ship. They brought a minister. They had people who had specific jobs. There were carpenters and weavers and basket makers and barrel makers. Coopers is what barrel makers are called. And so they were planning to build a permanent settlement. They were not planning to go back to England. Okay, it's 8 o'clock, but I want to see if there are any more questions. Were Hessians bounty hunters? No. Mr. Edwards says, I would want to know about the Committee of Five, Franklin, Adams, Sherman, Jefferson, and Livingston. I am not, Mr. Edwards, maybe you wrote a question about the Committee of Five. I'm not all into like memorizing specific, like that's awfully specific. I think that you should know out of that Committee of Five, I think there are two people that are most significant. I think that's John Adams. He was the one who was really pushing for independence. He was from Massachusetts. He will later become our first vice president of the United States and our second president of the United States. And then, of course, Thomas Jefferson. I think he's the most important member of that Committee of Five, since he was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. There's another question that says, are you going to do, Maddox asks, are you going to do live for every exam? Well, gosh, I've sure had a great time talking about history for the last hour. So if this goes well, and if I get some positive feedback from you, the people who have participated and who watched this, then absolutely I would do live again. Robert Livingston, Maddox is asking about Robert Livingston. He was the delegate from New York. He served on that committee, the Declaration Committee. Sherman, that's Roger Sherman. He was on the Declaration Committee. He was from Connecticut. You're possibly going to extend this for a few minutes. Yes, I'm doing that right now, Anita. So I'm going to keep talking. I'm just kind of going through questions. Robert Livingston, yes. Are we supposed to, Frembo asks, are we supposed to explain how we could make the AOC better on the test? The reason why we asked the question and we did the situation cards, the reason why we asked those questions about the Articles of Confederation was really to get you to think about the problems that the Articles had. We also wanted you to think, like, why did it seem like a good idea at the time, the whole Pete Davidson and Ariana Grande situation? It seemed like a good idea at the time, but it was actually a horrible idea. So that was the purpose of that activity, was to get you to think about how we could have made the articles better, because not that it's going to be on the test, but because that's going to be the springboard into learning about the Constitutional Convention. Because we're going to mess up, our founders are going to mess up on the Articles of Confederation, but they're going to fix it with the Constitution. That's the next thing we're going to learn about as soon as we're done learning about as soon as we're done with this exam. We jump into our next unit, which is the Constitutional Convention and the Constitution. Okay. Can you explain the Virginia Bill of Rights? I think Surya asked that. Caitlin asked that as well. With regard to the Virginia Bill of Rights, really, we learn about that because it's going to be, it demonstrates a couple things. First of all, Virginia Bill of Rights shows that we were already thinking about government as a means of protecting rights, and not just like setting up rules for how government is going to function, but government as a vehicle for protecting people's rights. In the Articles of Confederation, there's really no talk of protecting rights. And in the Constitution, they're also not going to include anything about people's rights. It is only later that we add to the United States Constitution, we add a Bill of Rights. And our US Bill of Rights is modeled in many ways after the Virginia Bill of Rights written by George Mason. It includes things like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. A lot of the freedoms that we just sort of like copied word for word into the United States Bill of Rights, we got originally from the Virginia Bill of Rights. So that's why that's important. Yeah, Connor's asking what's the committee of five. It's the five guys that were given the responsibility to write the Declaration of Independence. That's all that is. Okay. Are we going to review propaganda? Yabsura, that's a great question. And with the time that we have, I'm not going to go into all different 7 of the types of propaganda. I will let you know that you will absolutely have propaganda on the exam. I think probably good 5 or 6 questions on propaganda on the exam, the different types of propaganda. So I'm not going to go through all 7 types, but I will let you know that it would be very good to go over to review the 7 types, because you have those notes in your notes, the 7 different types of propaganda. So I would look through those. John says that was juicy live. Hope we do it again. Yes, I would agree with you, John. I hope we do too. Virginia Bill of Rights, Caitlin, we talked about that. Nicholas, you should stay off Fortnite until we're done. All right. Mr. Edwards says review the slides and your worksheet and know the 7 types of propaganda. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, for that. Oh, and I just lost. Here we go. Just trying to make sure that I got everything. Bill of Rights, Surya, I explained that to you. Can we do a Quizlet in class before the test? No. Bandwagon. Yeah, all the propaganda types. I'm not going to go through all the propaganda types, but you should study those because you have them all in your notes. And Mr. Edwards actually answered that question, so thank you. And Mr. Edwards is continuing to answer those questions. All right. Anissa says we did have to review all. Yes. Okay, Frembo, think positive. Okay, so I think this is now the conclusion. We're at 8:06, so we're just 6 minutes over. And I want you to now use the rest of your time. If you're on this live, 24 people on the live broadcast here. So thank you to everybody for asking great questions. At this point, here's what I've encouraged you to do. Play the Quizlet. Go over your notes. Review. You can look through your textbook, kind of flip through there. I really think, though, the most bang for your buck is going to be your in-class notes. You have all of those, the reading notes that you did. Again, that Quizlet includes all the vocabulary that we've learned about. And so I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the evening. And I will also remind you really quickly that, yes, you are invited. I will go ahead and run one final study session where you can ask any final questions that you have. I will run that during intervention time tomorrow during homeroom. And we will go ahead and answer any final questions that you have there. I'll be in my classroom at brunch as well. Good luck studying this evening. Do not stay up too late studying, because you want to make sure you get a good night's sleep so you can do your best, be at your best for tomorrow's exam. Thanks so much. Have a great evening, and I'll see you tomorrow in class. And Mr. Edwards, thank you for helping out. And I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, Mr. Edwards, but we'll hopefully get you patched in on the Q2 review for our next exam that we do. Thanks so much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.